Hello, my friend. If you're here, it's likely because you've known loss wounds that no one truly sees. Maybe you've endured in silence, tried your best just to make it through another day, not realizing how deeply meaningful that quiet survival really is. I made this video, not to help you become someone better, but simply to say something gentle and true. You are not alone, and you don't need to prove anything to move forward. I've lived over 60 years, and I'm here as an older friend just wanting to sit with you, to share the things I wish I had learned sooner, that you can be strong and still soft, that you can be hurt and still choose not to harden, that you can move on even when no one understands. Stoic philosophy didn't come to me as a dry intellectual system. It came as a quiet anchor, something to hold on to when no one else stayed. And to begin this journey together, I want to offer you a small gift, a special ebook, 20 Stoic Lessons for the Wounded Heart. I'll share how to receive it at the end of this video as a thank you for being brave enough to stay until the final moment. Because sometimes the most important gift isn't the content, it's the presence. Your presence in each conscious breath, in each step toward healing. Let's begin with the first lesson. No rush, no pressure. Just stay with me like you're listening to an old friend share stories over tea. And if anything I say finds its way into your heart, I believe that little book may be just the companion you need. Lesson 1. You don't need to be understood to be at peace. Hello, my friend. I want you to pause for just a few seconds and ask yourself, have you ever felt exhausted from constantly having to explain yourself? From trying to get someone to understand who you are, why you act the way you do, why your silence matters, only to end up feeling misunderstood. I once sat across from a woman in her 60s, silver hair, trembling voice. She said to me, I've spent more than half my life just trying to find someone who truly listens, but every time I end up feeling like I've been misunderstood. I looked at her for a long moment and gently replied, maybe the problem isn't with you, but with the fact that you keep offering your heart to those who don't know how to hold it. You see, we grow up in a world that teaches us to be understood is to be loved. But the truth is, some people don't understand you not because you're complicated, but because they've never learned to listen with their heart. They listen to argue, to judge, to conclude. I used to be like that. I used to trade my inner peace for a single word of approval, a glance of affirmation from someone else. And then I realized there are conversations that only lead to deeper isolation. There are people you try to get close to, only to find yourself drifting further from who you really are. You don't need to be understood to be at peace. Peace is something you can give yourself when you stop justifying, stop explaining, stop begging for empathy from someone who's never open to giving it. Ask yourself this: am I living to be understood or to be free? True freedom begins the moment you stop trading your inner truth for someone else's fleeting reassurance. There's a quiet kind of strength in realizing not everyone deserves to know you deeply, and that doesn't make you any less worthy, it makes you wiser. I want to leave you with this thought. If your heart were a sacred room, the one who truly listens won't barge in. They'll knock with sincerity. And if no one knocks, close the door, make yourself a warm cup of tea, and sit with your own soul. Because you deserve to be understood by the one who matters most, yourself. Lesson 2. Forgiveness doesn't mean permission. I once met a 70-year-old man widowed for over 15 years. He shared with me an old wound from his youth, a betrayal from a past love, something that still startles him awake some nights. He said, I thought I had forgiven her, but every time I remember my heart tightens. I asked him, what do you think forgiveness means? He replied, it means letting go, giving them a chance to return if they regret it. I stayed quiet for a moment, then gently said, maybe you haven't forgiven. Maybe you're just waiting for them to change. That's what I want to share with you today. Forgiveness is not opening the door for someone to come back. It's not pretending the pain never existed. Forgiveness is unshackling your own wrists and walking forward without dragging the weight of the past behind you. Are you still holding someone in your heart, not out of love, but out of anger? Are you still sitting with an unanswered question, a long overdue apology that never came? I want you to imagine this. Forgiveness is like releasing a tangled kite, not because it means nothing to you, but because you know you'll never soar if you keep holding on to that string. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing them to do it again. It doesn't mean accepting how they treated you. It's simply a quiet whisper to yourself, I deserve peace. I deserve a new day not ruled by old wounds. Some believe forgiveness is weakness. But I've seen the strongest people are the ones who dare to close the door they once waited by. Not out of hate, but because they chose themselves. And sometimes forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It's when you choose silence over revenge. When you decide not to bring it up again. When you stop waiting for understanding. Stop waiting for them to make it right. You have the right to forgive without reopening your heart. The right to move on without looking back. And the right to let go, not because they deserve it, but because you do. Lesson 3. Living without the need for approval. I once knew a man who retired at 55 after 30 years of dedication in the engineering field. He had a quiet dream since his youth to open a small bicycle repair shop, just to work with his hands, chat with neighborhood kids, and enjoy the slow rhythm of life. But when he shared that dream with friends, they laughed. You were a chief engineer, and now you want to fix flat tires. His family tried to stop him, believing he was trading prestige for something meaningless. So he gave up, simply because no one supported him. Years later, he told me that story one late afternoon. His eyes still carried a quiet sadness. He said, I wish I had the courage back then to live the way I wanted. Maybe I wouldn't regret it so much now. You see, sometimes we live as if life is a stage and every step we take must earn applause to feel right. But what's the truth? Life isn't a courtroom. You're not on trial. No one's sitting there grading your every decision. You don't need agreement to move forward. You don't need praise to live authentically. I once asked a 67-year-old woman who chose to remain single after her husband passed, do you ever feel lonely when everyone thinks you should move on? She smiled gently and replied, I don't feel lonely. I feel free. Freedom doesn't come from someone else's approval. It comes from knowing what makes your life feel right, whether or not anyone claps, anyone cheers. Don't trade the truth in your heart for the temporary comfort of someone else's validation. Easy nods don't nourish your soul. Remember this. There are paths only you understand, dreams that don't require an audience, and values, so long as you believe in them, are already enough. If you're standing at a crossroads and no one understands why you're choosing the road less traveled, walk it anyway. Because sometimes the quietest path is the clearest sign you're finally living for yourself, not performing for the crowd. Lesson 4. Not every wound needs a conversation to heal. An old friend of mine, 62, divorced after more than 30 years of marriage, once asked me on a quiet autumn afternoon, should I call her? Just to clear things up, to find out where I went wrong. And if she ever truly loved me, I looked at him and I didn't answer right away. Because I knew he wasn't really seeking clarity. What he truly wanted to know was, am I still worth someone's explanation? We've all been there. A relationship ends in silence. Someone disappears without a word. A question remains unanswered. And deep inside, a lingering ache keeps asking, why did they do that? We think that one conversation could fix it all. That if they would just talk, just listen, maybe it wouldn't hurt as much. But the truth is, some wounds don't heal through words. Some doors are closed to preserve peace, not to wait for someone to knock. Dialogue requires two hearts to be open, but sometimes you're the only one still willing while the other has long since shut down without warning. And you know what silence is an answer to. A harsh one, but a clear one. They no longer want to be there. They no longer see worth in that connection. But that doesn't make you any less worthy. It simply shows you've grown wise enough to know when to stop, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Forgiveness doesn't have to come with a hug, a nod, or a reconciliatory talk. Sometimes forgiveness is choosing silence without expecting a call. It's closing the chapter without needing a label that says resolved. I once told my friend, maybe she'll never call back, but you can still find peace if you accept this one truth. Not every pain needs an explanation. Are you still holding a door slightly open just in case someone comes back with an apology? If so, I hope you learn this. Closing that door isn't giving up. It's stepping out of the dim room of waiting and into the light of something new. Lesson 5. Every no you say is a yes to yourself. Once during a quiet conversation with a woman in her late 60s, I asked her, "When you were younger, did you often say no?" She shook her head and smiled wistfully. Back then, I thought saying no was selfish, that it would hurt others, that it would make me look cold or unkind. Then her voice softened with a sigh. I said yes to too many things I didn't truly want. And now I just wish I had the courage to say no sooner. Have you ever found yourself in that place? Someone asks for your time, your kindness, your forgiveness, or even your heart, and you say yes simply because you fear losing them, fear disappointing them, fear being seen as difficult. But here's the truth. Every time we say yes to what doesn't feel right, we're saying no to ourselves. We abandon our own needs just to preserve the illusion of peace. I once met a calm, thoughtful man in his 60s who had been the director of a large company. He told me I used to be the one everyone turned to for help. I didn't know how to say no, but slowly I burned out. I had no time left for my wife, my children, or myself. And eventually, I couldn't help anyone anymore. Sacrifice without clarity doesn't lead to love, it leads to depletion. Learning to say no isn't about pushing others away. It's about bringing yourself back. It's setting boundaries not out of rejection, but out of respect for your own worth, clarity, and peace. Every no you speak is a yes to healing, a yes to self-respect, a yes to the wisdom you may have once forgotten. Remember, you don't have to apologize for choosing yourself. You don't have to feel guilty for closing a door that protects your heart. That's not coldness, it's growth. Are you still saying yes to what drains you just to keep someone from leaving? If you are, I hope you'll learn how to say no. Not to reject others, but so that for the first time you can truly say yes to yourself. Lesson 6. Don't let the past decide your future. I once sat with a man in his mid-60s. He sat across from me, gazing out the window in silence. After a long pause, he finally said, "All my life I felt I don't deserve happiness. Because when I was young, I did something wrong. No one brings it up anymore, but I can't forget it." I didn't ask him what he had done. Instead, I quietly asked, "Are you still the man you were back then?" He fell silent again for a long time. You see, we often trap ourselves in an old version of who we once were, the version that made mistakes, that failed, that was betrayed, that lost something precious. And so we live as if we're no longer worthy of anything good. But here's what I want you to remember. The past is something that happened, not something that's happening. It only defines you if you keep letting it write your next chapter. I'm not asking you to forget everything. Some things we simply can't forget, but you can learn to remember without letting the memory drag you backward. I once worked with a woman nearing 70 who had been betrayed by her own family, robbed of trust, of security. For years, she lived in bitterness, closed off from connection, afraid to trust again. Until one day she told me, "I don't want to die angry. I want to try believing again, not because I've forgotten, but because I refuse to let my past control me." That line has stayed with me ever since. You don't have to erase every scar, but you can choose not to let them steer the wheel of your life. Every morning you wake up, you're handed a blank page, and that page doesn't have to begin with "once upon a time." You can rewrite it. You can redefine who you are. You can look your past in the eye and say, "Thank you for the lesson. But I'm the one writing the next chapter, not you." Because in the end, no one needs to forgive you more than you need to forgive yourself and allow yourself to move forward. Lesson 7. You don't need to win. You just need not to become them. I want you to picture this. You've been betrayed. The person you trusted most turned their back, lied, maybe even hurt you in the cruelest way. The first thing that usually rises isn't sadness, it's anger. I've been there, and I know many others have too. That urge to strike back, to teach them a lesson, to show them they underestimated you. You want to prove a point. You want to win. You want them to regret ever crossing you. But then I realized something. Every time we strike back, we're picking up the very weapon they used to wound us. A woman I once supported around 60 was betrayed by her closest friend. She told me I thought about exposing her, embarrassing her, giving her a taste of her own medicine. But then I realized I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. You see, some victories come at the cost of your own character. Some acts of revenge leave you more wounded because you trade away your kindness, your forgiveness, and the peace within your soul. Forgiveness isn't about whether they deserve it. It's about choosing not to become like them. You don't need to make anyone regret what they did. You don't need to prove anything. You only need to live in a way that lets you look in the mirror and hold your head high. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And I believe that with all my heart. When you're hurt, you have two choices. You can lock yourself in anger and let it slowly erode your heart. Or you can rise above it with your dignity and compassion still intact. I know, letting go is hard. But you know what's harder? Living your whole life bitter and realizing the one who hurt you has moved on while you remained stuck in a version of yourself you no longer recognize. So if you're carrying a wound right now, ask yourself, do I need to win or do I need peace? Because sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to be pulled down with them. Lesson 8. Intentional silence is power. I once spoke with a man in his early 70s. For decades, he had been a leader in a harsh, demanding environment where speaking up, reacting quickly, and asserting dominance were seen as marks of strength. But now, away from meetings, arguments, and endless battles, he shared something simple, yet it stayed with me. The older I get, the more I realize. Real strength isn't in how much you speak, but in knowing when to stay silent. Have you ever felt that moment when someone attacks you, insults you, misunderstands you, and a fire rises in your chest? You want to snap back to defend yourself, to throw a sharp word in return, but instead, you swallow it. You breathe slowly. You stay silent. Not because you lost, but because you chose peace over pride, dignity over dispute. I learned this through my own scars, through arguments I won, but left me feeling hollow. Because the more I explained, the more it hurt. The more I reacted, the deeper I sank into someone else's emotional chaos. Silence, when born from awareness, isn't surrender. It's a conscious decision. You refuse to join a battle unworthy of your soul. You protect your spirit from another person's storm. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you that harms you, but how you respond to it." And sometimes the wisest response is no response at all. I'm not saying you must stay silent forever. But let your silence speak. I am strong enough not to fight with words. I am guarding what matters most, my inner stillness. Are you wasting energy on conversations you already know are fruitless? If so, try silence not as weakness, but as a sign of strength. You don't need to raise your voice to prove your worth. Silence, when it comes from clarity and self-control, is the loudest voice of a heart that has truly matured. Lesson 10. You don't need to build walls, just set boundaries. I once spoke with a 68-year-old man who had been separated from his wife for nearly a decade, not out of resentment, but because they could no longer stay in a relationship that slowly made them lose themselves. He told me, I don't love her the way I used to, but I still care. I still wish her peace. I just no longer have the strength to live in a house filled with tension and hurt. I asked him, do you feel guilty for walking away? He nodded, then stayed quiet for a long time. Yes, but I knew if I stayed, I would lose the best parts of myself. You see, sometimes to protect the goodness within, we have to step away. Not to build a wall, but to draw a line. We often confuse strength with distance, thinking we must harden ourselves, become unapproachable, push everyone away to stay safe. But living like that isn't living. It's hiding in a fortress of loneliness. Boundaries aren't bricks. They're a sign on the door that says, I know what keeps my heart safe. And I ask you to respect that. Those who don't understand will call you selfish. Those who've never been violated will say you're too sensitive. But the ones who've been there, they'll nod and say, I get it. Not everyone has the right to enter your heart. Not because you're cold, but because you've learned the sacred art of protection. Some things once crossed too easily can never be restored. So live with an open heart, but choose wisely. Love deeply, but with awareness. And remember, between isolation and growth, there's a fine line, and it's called discernment. Lesson 11. A full life doesn't need a perfect ending. I once sat with a 72-year-old woman during an art therapy session for seniors. She painted beautifully, yet most of her works were unfinished with no clear conclusion. When I asked her why, she smiled and said, because not everything in life needs a happy ending. Some things just need to be lived fully in the moment. That's enough. I thought about that for a long time. We're often haunted by this idea of a deserving ending, a love that deserves a proper goodbye, a friendship that deserves a farewell, a chapter in life that deserves a neat and tidy wrap-up. But the truth is, some things end without a final scene. Some people leave without warning. Some stories never follow the script. And that doesn't make your journey any less meaningful. I once met a man in his 60s who had loved a woman for 10 years, but they never had closure. She left quietly without a goodbye. And yet he said, I don't hold it against her. Because during those years, I loved with all I had. And that's enough for me. You don't need a perfect ending to justify what you've lived with sincerity. Sometimes maturity is knowing how to stand up without help. How to smile even when nothing ends the way you hoped. How to honor the journey even when the destination holds no grand conclusion. Life isn't a play with a curtain call. It's a river ever flowing. And your task is not to end it neatly, but to live every bend fully. Remember, what makes you whole is not how it ends, but how deeply you lived through it. Lesson 12. Betrayal doesn't define you, it defines them. I once met a 63-year-old man widowed for many years. After spending a long time alone, he finally opened his heart to a woman he had recently met. They were together for nearly 2 years until one day, she left without a word, and he later discovered she had never been sincere. I asked him, "Are you angry?" He looked at me for a long while, then shook his head. "Yes, but only briefly. Now, I just feel lighter, because I was genuine." You see, betrayal is one of the deepest wounds, not just because of what we lose, but because it makes us question ourselves. Was I naive? What did I do wrong? Was I not good enough? We often let someone else's actions define our worth. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't happen because you weren't worthy. It happens because they weren't honest. A dishonest person doesn't diminish your value. A liar doesn't prove that you were too trusting. They simply reveal more about who they truly are. Epictetus once said, "We cannot control the actions of others, but we can control how we respond." You have a choice. You can stay stuck in anger and self-doubt, or you can move forward with your dignity intact and your heart still shining. I once asked a woman in her 60s who had been financially betrayed by her own family, "Do you feel like you've lost your faith in people?" She answered, "Yes, but I won't let that take away my kindness." That is strength. The strength of someone who refuses to live forever as a victim. Someone who dares to feel the pain but also dares to rise. Not out of bitterness, but out of freedom. Remember this. Betrayal is their action. Honor is your decision. And no one has the power to take away your worth simply because they failed to value it. Loving sincerely is never something to regret. The real loss belongs to the one who wasn't true enough to hold on to it. Lesson 13. Not everyone deserves to hear your heart. An older friend once told me, "These days I no longer share my story with just anyone. Not because I have nothing left to say, but because I've learned to choose who's worthy of hearing it. And I've come to understand that more deeply than ever." When we're young, we often believe that sincerity will always be met with understanding, that if we speak our truth, live openly, others will respect and listen. But life teaches you something far more subtle. Not everyone has the capacity to listen with their heart. Some people listen just to argue, some to gather information, some to manipulate your emotions. And when you give your honesty too freely, it's not nobility, it's exposure. You're laying your heart bare in a place that may not hold it gently. I once met a man in his 60s, a once successful businessman who told me that after going bankrupt, he confided in a few so-called close friends. What happened? They whispered behind his back, twisted his story, and eventually disappeared. "I thought I could trust them," he said, "but I was just another headline for their gossip." That's when he learned an important lesson. Sincerity is like a seed, it needs the right soil to grow. You don't need to share your pain with everyone. You don't need to explain your journey to those who haven't taken a single step in it. Because if you treat your heart like an open diary, some will flip through the pages without reading, while others will scribble on them with cruelty. Choose to share with those who treat your words as sacred. Those who hold space without judgment. Who don't try to fix you, interrupt you, or rush to offer advice, but simply stay present and listen with kindness. Silence is a boundary. And choosing who you open up to is an act of self-love. Because some parts of your heart are meant only for those who know how to enter gently. Lesson 14. Not every pain carries a profound meaning. I once spoke with a woman in her 60s, a thoughtful, introspective soul. She told me about a past relationship. A man had left her without a clear reason. She asked me, "Was I too independent? Did that make him feel unnecessary? Then maybe I talked too much about emotions." And finally, with a sigh, "Or was I just not attractive enough?" I listened for a long time, then gently said, "Maybe there was no deep reason. Maybe he was simply someone not ready to stay. And you've been trying to find depth in something shallow. You see, when we're hurt, we tend to seek meaning. We want to believe the pain we endured must teach us something, that it must be a wake-up call, a test, a stepping stone to growth. And yes, some pain is like that. But Kimmy, some wounds exist simply because the other person was careless, because they lacked maturity, because they were selfish, or because they were too hollow to recognize something valuable. Not everything that happens is some subtle lesson from the universe. Sometimes it's just a reflection of someone else's lack of depth awareness or responsibility. And you don't need to exhaust yourself analyzing it. You don't need to dig through darkness looking for a light that was never there. Someone once told me I thought if I could just understand why they did it, I'd hurt less. But the truth is, understanding doesn't always equal healing. Sometimes all you need to say is, "It happened. It wasn't fair. And I no longer need to carry it." You are not someone else's test. And the pain you've endured doesn't need to become a grand explanation. Sometimes you just need to say, "I was hurt. But I won't let that drain the beauty out of me." Not every pain runs deep, but you can still live deeply because you've chosen to preserve your grace even when others failed to recognize its worth. Lesson 15. Redefining what truly matters. Once during a group therapy session for retirees, I asked, "If tomorrow were your last day, what do you wish you had done differently?" Someone said, "I wish I'd spent more time with my children." Another said, "I wish I had said I love you sooner." But then a small woman with snow-white hair and eyes full of life experience spoke softly, "I wish I had lived for myself, not for fear." Her words stopped me in my tracks, because I realized far too many people spend their whole lives trying to avoid mistakes, avoid rejection, avoid letting others down, avoid getting hurt. And in that endless circle of avoidance, they lose the one thing that matters most themselves. We get swept up in being proper, successful, acceptable. But how often do we pause and ask, what about me? Am I truly living the life I want, or am I just fitting myself into a map drawn by someone else? Redefining what truly matters doesn't mean throwing everything away. It means looking honestly at your life and asking, what values make me feel aligned with what's right in my soul? Who are the people around whom I can simply be without pretending, without explaining? What small acts soften my heart every time I do them? You're no longer here to impress. Life is not a contest to be won. It's a space to be lived genuinely, gently, and with grace. Live so that each day you don't have to apologize to yourself for staying silent, for compromising too far, for abandoning the quiet dream you carried in your heart. Rebuild your values not from wounds, but from wisdom. Not from others' voices, but from listening deeply to your own. Not because you should, but because you deserve to. And sometimes to find what truly matters, you don't need to add anything new. You just need to let go of what's no longer real. Lesson 16. The strongest comeback requires nothing to prove. Have you ever felt that urge to show someone I've moved on? Look at me, happy, successful, thriving. I don't need you anymore, I've been there. Where pride was so bruised, I wanted my healing to be a performance. I wanted the one who hurt me to see. But then I realized every time I tried to prove I was better, it meant I still hadn't let go. I was still living in their shadow, still writing my story for someone else to read. A man I once met, 66 years old, told me his wife had left him after over 30 years together. She left for someone else. He said I wanted to get rich fast, buy a new house, a new car, wear sharp suits, just so she'd see I didn't need her. But after years of striving and pretending, he collapsed from exhaustion. One day he told me I asked myself, who am I really living for? And if I'm truly okay, why do I still feel the need to prove it? You see, the strongest comeback isn't loud. It doesn't need a stage. It doesn't wait for applause. It's when you can smile again, live quietly, feel whole, carry lightness in your heart and no longer speak their name. Not because you forgot, but because you've stopped letting pain define your worth. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Your happiness depends on the quality of your thoughts, not on what others say about you, not in the glance of someone who walked away, and certainly not in someone else's late regrets. You don't need anyone to know you've healed. As long as you know, that's enough. because the truly strong don't return wearing shining armor. They stand quietly in the world with a heart that's healed, and no anger left to carry. Lesson 17. Master your thoughts before you try to master life. One morning during a meditation class I was leading for seniors, a 71-year-old man sat beside me and said quietly, "I've realized, for decades I haven't truly lived. I've just been chasing my own thoughts like a shadow without form." I asked, "What kind of thoughts?" He looked into the distance. I was afraid my wife would leave me. Then I worried my children weren't good enough. I feared illness, old age, loneliness. And because I was afraid, I tried to control everything. But in the end, it was fear that was controlling me. Have you ever felt that way? Like your thoughts run endlessly like a river with no shore. You no longer know what's real and what's just your mind's fiction. A cold glance, you think they hate you. A late reply, you assume you've been forgotten. One small mistake and you sentence yourself to days of silent guilt. We think life is what makes us suffer. But most pain doesn't come from what happens, it comes from how we think about what happens. Stoicism teaches you can't control the world, but you can control your response. And that response begins in one place: your thoughts. An old friend once wrote in his journal, "When I learned to filter my thoughts the way I filter who enters my home, my life stopped feeling so chaotic." Imagine your mind as a sacred room. Each thought is a guest knocking at the door. You can say, "No, I'm not receiving anxiety today. Sorry, insecurity, there's no seat left for you." And you can welcome the guests that nourish your soul. Gratitude, calm, self-respect. Mastering life doesn't begin with money or titles or worldly success. It begins with your mindset. What your mind believes, your life will echo. Lesson 18. You don't need to be understood to move on. A 64-year-old woman once sat in front of me, tears falling in silence. She said, "I've explained myself so many times. To my ex-husband, to my daughter, to my friends. All I ever wanted was a little understanding, a little listening. But it seems no one really sees me." I didn't tell her to explain more. I didn't urge her to forgive right away. I simply asked, "If they never understand, can you still move forward?" She sat in silence for a long time. I think many of us have felt what she felt. We don't hurt because someone left. We hurt because they left without ever truly seeing who we are. We're not angry at the rejection itself. We're angry that someone refused even the chance to understand us with their whole heart. But there comes a time when you must stop trying. Not because you have nothing left to say, but because you've already said enough to someone who was never truly listening. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Love the truth more than the need to be understood." You are not a puzzle for others to solve. You are a river ever flowing. And once you become clear within yourself, you no longer need agreement to keep moving forward. People don't fail to understand you because you're too complex. They fail because they only listen to reply, not to connect. And you don't need to repeat your story endlessly just to earn a nod. Believe this. Peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. And when you rise and quietly walk away from places that no longer deserve you, you don't need to appear strong. You just need to know why you're walking. You don't need to win the argument. You only need to keep your inner calm intact. Lesson 19. Pain doesn't have to make you bitter. I once spoke with a 67-year-old man. He lived alone after many losses. He had lost loved ones, friends, and his trust in the things he once held sacred. He told me, "I used to trust people. I helped. I opened up. I was sincere. But the more I lived, the more I saw that the people I treated best were the first to walk away. Little by little, I shut down. I stopped trusting. I stopped letting anyone close." I didn't blame him. How could I blame someone whose heart had weathered so many storms and learned to close itself just to survive? But I asked him, "And after closing your heart like that, did it hurt any less?" He sat quietly, then slowly shook his head. "You see, pain doesn't need to and shouldn't turn you bitter. You can be hurt and still stay gentle. You can be disappointed and still choose not to hurt others. You can fail in love and still look at the world with eyes full of compassion." Stoicism doesn't teach us to be cold or harsh. It teaches us to preserve our character even in an unfair world. Epictetus once said, "We are not born to punish those who hurt us, but to ensure we do not become them." Pain is something you didn't choose. But how you live after the pain, that's always your choice. You can become cynical, guarded, someone who only speaks through a mask. Or you can choose to become softer, wiser, more awake, without growing cruel. True strength is not the armor, it's the heart that has walked through fire and still chooses kindness. If you feel yourself changing today, don't be afraid. But do ask, am I changing to protect myself? Or am I losing what's most beautiful in me? Because sometimes the thing that needs healing isn't just the wound. It's the belief that you can still live kindly in a world that sometimes forgets how. If you've stayed until this very moment, I want to thank you, not for watching the whole video, but for choosing to sit with yourself in a world that's always rushing somewhere else. As I promised at the beginning, I have a small gift for you, the ebook 20 Healing Lessons from Stoicism for the Wounded Heart. It's a collection of stories, reflections, and insights gathered from over 60 years of living and walking alongside others who've known heartbreak like I have, and maybe like you have too. You can download the ebook for free by clicking the link in the description below this video. No email, no sign up. If you want to read it, that's all that matters. And if what I've shared here meant something to you, remember, tap like so YouTube knows you want to continue this journey. Hit subscribe and the bell icon so I can meet you again in lessons that are softer, deeper, and always honest. Because I believe this. We don't need to change the whole world. We just need to live each day a little more truthfully with ourselves, and that is already enough.